They ask how you're doing, and you say, fine, because the truth takes too long to explain. It's not that you're lying, it's just that most people don't really want to know. They want the version of you that doesn't make them uncomfortable. So you play the part. You show up, you smile, you laugh when you're supposed to. You keep giving, and they keep taking, never noticing the cracks forming underneath your surface. Every joke you fake laugh at, every conversation where your words feel hollow, it's the slow kind of drowning, quiet, private, exhausting. You start feeling it in the small things. You forget things more often. You stare at your phone and don't know who to text. You scroll through messages and everything feels forced. Your room gets quieter, even when the world outside is loud. You're there, but you're fading. Not all at once, but in pieces. You still function. You still reply. But your energy's gone. You're running on autopilot. You're surrounded by people, but you've never felt lonelier. It doesn't come with a dramatic breakdown, no screaming, no public tears. It's silent. You start dying inside in the quietest way possible. It's when your favorite song doesn't sound the same, when food loses its taste, when compliments feel suspicious. You stop hoping, not because you want to, but because hoping hurts. You stop expecting, not because you've healed, but because you're tired of being let down. You smile in photos but flinch at your reflection. Your phone rings and you let it, not because you're busy, but because you can't fake the energy to care. You show up for people who never show up for you. You remember birthdays they forget. You send long messages and get one-word replies. You hype people up when no one checks on you. And every time you do it, a part of you whispers, why? But you silence that voice. You keep telling yourself this is what being strong looks like. But it's not strength, it's survival. It's giving from an empty cup because it's all you've ever known. People see your presence and assume you're okay. But they don't notice how often you go quiet, how often you cancel plans, how your messages have shifted from long paragraphs to dry replies. You start disappearing in plain sight. They call it mood swings. They say you're acting strange, but they never ask what broke you. They never ask what changed, because if they did, they'd have to face the part they played. You become a master at hiding it. You crack jokes to avoid real questions. You overwork to avoid real feelings. You stay up late, scrolling through things you don't care about, just to avoid the thoughts waiting in the dark. You start saying, I'm tired, instead of I'm hurt, because exhaustion is easier to understand. And slowly, the fire that used to light your heart turns to smoke. Everything you used to care about starts to fade. Passions turn into routines. Dreams turn into background noise. You're not numb because you want to be. You're numb because it hurts too much to feel anything. No one tells you that pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it sounds like silence. Sometimes it's sitting in a room full of people and feeling invisible. It's laughing too loud to hide the ache in your chest. It's listening to people talk about things that used to excite you and feeling absolutely nothing. It's putting on clothes, doing your hair, and still hating the reflection. Not because you're vain, but because you don't recognize yourself anymore. You try to explain it once or twice, but people say, you're overthinking, or don't be so sensitive. So you stop trying, you lock it in, and then you begin to question yourself. Maybe it is just you. Maybe you are too emotional, too intense, too much. And that self-doubt becomes a virus. It spreads fast. Now you hesitate before texting someone first. You second-guess every word you speak. You apologize for existing too loudly. You become smaller and smaller, thinking that maybe if you shrink enough, they'll accept you. You miss the old version of you, the one who was bright, who believed, who didn't overanalyze every interaction. But that version got tired. That version got burned. You gave too much of yourself to people who only took, and now the tank is empty. But the world doesn't pause, so you keep moving. You go to work, you post, you smile, and inside, you're screaming. But no one hears it, because you've become too good at hiding it. You wonder if anyone sees it, the weight you carry, the way your heart breaks a little more each day. But no one says anything, and that's the part that hurts most. Not the pain itself, but the silence it's met with. You didn't want to be saved. You just wanted someone to notice, to say, "I see you. I know it's hard." But they never did, so you stopped waiting, and you started dying quietly. That's how it happens. Not with a bang, but with silence, with unspoken words and swallowed emotions. You lose yourself while trying to be everything for everyone else. And one day, you wake up and realize you're not the same. You're colder, sharper, quieter. And you wonder when that shift happened. You wonder when the light went out. But it's hard to trace, because emotional death isn't marked by one moment. It's a series of small cuts that no one sees until you're bleeding out. They were never strangers. They were the ones you trusted the most, the ones you stood by when everyone else walked away, the ones who cried on your shoulder, borrowed your strength, and swore they'd never hurt you. You didn't protect them because you had to. You did it, Dee, because it felt right. Because love, to you, meant sacrifice. It meant showing up when it was inconvenient. It meant giving when you had little. And it never crossed your mind that the same hands you held would be the first to let you fall. It didn't happen all at once. That's what made it worse. It was slow, quiet, 1,000 tiny betrayals that you kept brushing off. You told yourself they were just having a bad day, that maybe you expected too much, that love means patience, forgiveness. You bent until you broke, but no one noticed. Or maybe they did, and they just didn't care. You started shrinking so they could shine. You stayed silent so they could speak. You made yourself small in rooms you built just to make sure they were comfortable. Then came the moments when they laughed at your pain, not always with words, sometimes with silence. Indifference cuts sharper than hate. You'd reach out, desperate to be heard, and they'd shrug it off like you were being dramatic, sensitive, too emotional. The things you once celebrated about yourself, the empathy, the softness, the loyalty, became weapons in their hands. They turned your light into a target. The more you gave, the less they respected you. You were no longer a person to them, just a convenience. They used your kindness like currency, took what they needed, then blamed you when you had nothing left. They expected you to stay, no matter how much it hurt. And you did, for a while, because you thought loyalty was a virtue. But loyalty without reciprocity is slavery, and you didn't see it until the day they didn't even flinch while watching you fall apart. That moment changed something in you. You weren't angry yet. You were numb, empty, and that was scarier than any rage. You didn't know who to be anymore. The person you were, the gentle one, the believer, the fixer, didn't feel safe. You kept asking yourself what you did wrong, where you failed, why you weren't enough. You analyzed every word, every look, hoping it would make sense, but it never did, because it wasn't about you. They chose convenience over compassion, ego over honesty, and you were just collateral damage. Still, it's hard to let go of people who once felt like home, even when that home burns you. You keep going back to the memories, the good times, the laughs, the promises. You replay them like a broken record, hoping they'll explain the betrayal. But memories are liars. They show you what you want to remember, not what you need to face. And the truth is, they changed. Or maybe they never were who you thought they were. Maybe you were just too good at seeing the potential instead of the pattern. There were nights you couldn't sleep, days where food had no taste, smiles felt forced, your body moved but your soul lagged behind. And the worst part, they acted like nothing happened, like your breakdown was inconvenient, like your sadness was annoying. They didn't apologize, they didn't check in, they didn't care. They replaced you before you had time to process what even went wrong. That messes with you. It makes you question your worth, your sanity. The loneliness wasn't just being without people. It was being surrounded by them and still feeling invisible, still feeling unprotected. It's a special kind of pain when the people you defended, in rooms you weren't even in, leave you defenseless in front of the world. You weren't perfect, but you were honest. You showed up, you loved hard, and it wasn't enough. That truth stings more than any insult. You tried to speak up, but they twisted it. Suddenly, you were the problem. Too sensitive, too negative. You were bringing the mood down. They made you the villain in the story you bled to write. And after a while, you stopped talking. You buried your pain in silence. You let it simmer. And in that silence, something in you started to shift, but not yet into anger. First, into grief. You grieved the people you thought they were. You grieved the version of yourself that thought loyalty guaranteed protection. You grieved your own ignorance. Because once you see betrayal clearly, there's no going back. You can't unfeel that hurt. You can't unsee that moment when they could have defended you and chose not to. When they could have told the truth and chose comfort instead. That's what betrayal does. It doesn't just break your heart. It makes you question your mind, your memory, your instincts. You start to wonder if you imagined the love, if maybe you deserved the abandonment. But you didn't, and you know that now. Still, at the time it felt real, raw, and unrelenting. You gave your soul to people who only came to collect, who mistook your love for leverage, who smiled in your face and stabbed you quietly, carefully, not in the back, but in places only they knew how to reach. They didn't just break your trust, they broke the version of you that still believed in unconditional love. And that was the real tragedy. You didn't scream, you just went quiet. People think silence means weakness, but they never understand what kind of storm it holds. After everything that happened, after being torn apart by the ones you gave your soul to, there was nothing left to explain. The silence wasn't surrender. It was mourning, not of them, not of the loss, but of the person you used to be, the one who forgave too quickly, who waited too long, who gave too much. That version of you didn't survive, and nobody noticed. They looked at you and saw stillness. They thought you were done, finished, easy to forget. But silence isn't the absence of noise. It's the weight of everything you wanted to say but decided not to. Every time they laughed behind your back, every moment they mocked your kindness, you stayed quiet. Because words felt useless. You had already said everything, given everything. They chose to ignore it. It's painful when your voice stops mattering to the people you once protected with it. You used to speak with care. You used to lift others when you were the one sinking. But silence became your new language. Not out of fear, not out of defeat, but because you were exhausted, tired of being misunderstood, tired of speaking gently and still being broken. So you sat with your pain, not to be pitied, but to finally listen to yourself. And that's when everything changed. People don't notice the shift until it's too late. They confuse the quiet with weakness, But something was building in that silence. The kind of strength that doesn't need to be announced. You stopped begging. You stopped explaining yourself to people who only listened to reply, not to understand. You were no longer looking for validation. You were grieving the angel they destroyed. The kindness that once defined you now felt dangerous to hold. Every soft part of you had been used against you. They didn't break you in one blow. It was slow. Manipulation disguised as love. Lies dressed up as concern. Criticism wrapped in fake smiles. And still, you stayed. Still, you tried to fix it. Because that's who you were. But that version of you died silently. No funeral, no farewell. Just a quiet disappearance. There's a certain power in being forgotten. While they moved on, laughing, pretending you never mattered. You were sitting with your pain and stitching yourself back together. Alone, without applause, without comfort. That silence held your rage, your sadness, your confusion. But it also held the first seeds of transformation. They never saw it coming. They thought the silence meant you had nothing left. But the truth was, you were building something inside of yourself they could never reach. You were becoming someone else. Not overnight, not with a single decision, but in moments of clarity that only pain could give you. You stopped trying to be who they needed you to be. You started becoming who you needed to be for yourself. Silence has a memory. It remembers who hurt you, who stayed quiet while others mocked you, who looked away when you needed them most, and it keeps score, not for revenge, but for truth, so you don't forget, so you don't repeat, because you were done bleeding for people who would never even hand you a bandage. You weren't angry at first, just empty, numb. That's what they don't see, the emptiness before the fire. You wanted to scream, to lash out, to make them feel what you felt. But what's the point of screaming when no one is really listening? So you stopped, and in that stillness you learned how to listen to yourself again. You realized you were never weak. You were just surrounded by people who benefited from you thinking that way. And that silence became your armor. You weren't plotting revenge. You were healing. But healing looks different when you're doing it alone. It's not gentle. It's not poetic. It's brutal. You cry in secret. You lose sleep. You question your worth every single day. But you keep going. You get up. You do what needs to be done, quietly, without asking for permission. They still talk, still pretend they knew the real you. But they only knew the version of you who needed love so badly. You were willing to break yourself to get it. That person's gone, and your silence made sure of it. You didn't post about your pain. You didn't beg for attention. You disappeared from their lives and started living for yourself. The silence wasn't weakness. It was your strategy. You were learning who you really were underneath all the expectations, the guilt, the shame. You were cutting ties, letting go of illusions. You weren't healing to be soft again. You were healing so no one could hurt you the same way twice. They see it now, but they don't understand it. They still think your quiet means nothing. But your silence built the version of you that no longer needs their approval. You're no longer desperate to be heard by those who used to drown you out. Because now, your silence says more than your words ever could. You stopped crying. One day, without warning, the tears just didn't come. Not because the pain was gone, but because something inside you had changed. You realized that no one was coming to save you. No one cared enough. No one ever really did. You were shouting for help in a room full of people, but no one even turned their head. That silence said everything. You had begged for clarity, for closure, for honesty, but instead you got excuses, lies, and fake apologies, the kind that leave you more confused than before, and you got tired. tired of proving your worth, tired of showing people how to love you, tired of explaining why you deserved better. So you stopped, not because you forgave them, but because you realized they didn't deserve your voice anymore. That's when something shifted. You started walking differently, not physically, but with a different presence. You didn't need attention anymore. You stopped chasing. You weren't trying to fix anything. You were becoming something else, something unrecognizable even to yourself. You started seeing things for what they really were, the smiles that were fake, the promises that were empty, the friendships that were one-sided, the people you called family who only showed up when it benefited them. It all came into focus. You used to think being good meant sacrificing your needs for others, but now you understood that boundaries were not cruelty. They were survival. You began pulling back, not out of anger, but out of wisdom. You weren't healing just to return to who you were. That person got broken. That version of you didn't make it. You weren't rising from the ashes. You were building something new from scratch. And this version had scars, yes, but it also had armor. The betrayal didn't kill you. It refined you. It forced you to grow up faster, to see how ugly people can be when they know you're soft. People don't always stab you in the back. Sometimes they do it to your face with a smile and a hug. And you remember the exact moment you stopped blaming yourself. You remembered all the warnings you ignored, the red flags you painted white, the instincts you silenced, and then you forgave of yourself. That was the hardest part. Not forgiving them, but forgiving yourself for trusting them in the first place. You didn't tell anyone what you were going through anymore, because you realized most people just want gossip, not truth. They want drama, not healing. So you became silent. You kept your moves low. You worked in shadows. No one saw the nights you couldn't sleep. No one saw the journals filled with rage, the unread texts, the drafts you never sent, the conversations you replayed in your head 1,000 times, looking for the moment it all broke. No one saw that part. You started doing things you never thought you could. Small things at first. Waking up earlier, taking care of your body, saying no without guilt, cutting off people you used to defend, reading instead of scrolling, writing instead of venting. Bit by bit, you were rewiring your mind. It wasn't about becoming a better version of yourself. It was about becoming the version no one could break again. You stopped asking why they hurt you. It didn't matter anymore. The truth is, some people hurt you because they can, because they don't see your value until you take it back, because they think you'll always be there. But you weren't anymore. You had walked away, even if they never noticed. You had started building walls, not to keep love out, but to keep self-respect in. You didn't change overnight. You still had moments of weakness. You still missed them sometimes. Still wondered if it could have been different. But those thoughts didn't control you anymore. They passed like clouds, and underneath it all, there was calm, not happiness, but clarity. You weren't the same. You had learned to observe, not react, to listen without defending, to leave without explaining. Your presence started to feel different. People who once walked over you began to feel your absence. They noticed the distance, but they didn't know what it cost you to get there. Some reached out, too late. Some tried to guilt you, but you weren't that person anymore. You didn't need closure. You didn't need apologies. You needed peace. And peace came when you accepted that some people are only meant to be lessons. You weren't seeking revenge. That would have meant you still cared. You didn't want to hurt anyone. You wanted to outgrow them. And you did, quietly, powerfully. not to prove them wrong, but to prove to yourself that you could, that you didn't need saving, that your pain didn't define you, that you could survive the fire without turning to ash. You became strategic. You began planning. Your emotions no longer ran the show. You moved with intention. You set goals. You took your time. And you didn't tell a soul, because they had taught you to protect your peace by keeping your progress private. You became calculated, but not cold. Just guarded. Just smarter. You weren't born this way. They made you this way. And for the first time in a long time, you weren't ashamed of it. They broke something in you that day, not your heart. It was bigger than that. They broke your belief that goodness meant safety, that love was a shield. You kept giving. You kept trusting. You believed that if you showed them your soul, they would protect it. Instead, they shattered it. Not loudly, not in some dramatic moment. They did it quietly, slowly, behind smiles and words that sounded kind, but cut sharper than silence. And when you looked for someone to save you, no one came. You sat in that pain for a long time, letting it burn everything soft left in you. You stopped defending yourself. You stopped trying to make them understand. You were done explaining your heart to people who only wanted to step on it. The angel in you was still whispering, still hoping, but every day that voice got quieter until it stopped. Something else began to grow. Not anger, not at first. It was awareness, clarity, that what they called loyalty was just convenience, that their love was only there when you were small enough not to threaten them. You realized that they didn't want peace. They wanted power over you, over your light. They weren't afraid of your darkness. They were afraid you'd stop giving them access to the light you carried. You stopped crying, not because the pain stopped, because you got tired of your tears being entertainment. They watched you break and called it drama. They called your silence guilt. They made your grief look like weakness. And so you stopped explaining. You stopped warning. You started working. Not revenge, not hate, strategy. You started treating your life like a blueprint. Every betrayal became a marker. Every lie, a lesson. You stopped being open with people who didn't earn your honesty. You began watching more than you spoke. They thought you disappeared, but you didn't disappear. You went underground. You started building without noise, no announcements, no calls for help. They taught you to be silent. You turned it into strength. You began looking at pain like data. Every scar had information. Every time they underestimated you, it showed you where their weakness was. You took your pain and crafted it into skill. You studied people, patterns. You understood now that some smiles hide envy, that some hands are extended just to pull you down. And instead of fighting that, you adjusted, quietly, cleanly. You became calculated, not cruel. You weren't looking to destroy anyone. You just refused to let them destroy you again. You knew now that kindness without boundaries was self-harm, that not everyone deserves access to your softness, that love doesn't mean lowering your standards. You started setting rules. You stuck to them. No exceptions. They said you changed, but they never noticed what they did to make that happen. Your presence started to feel different, sharper, heavier. You no longer tried to fit in. You became selective, exclusive. You stopped apologizing for your standards. You stopped entertaining disrespect masked as jokes. They called you cold, but you weren't cold. You were focused. You didn't raise your voice. You raised your vibration. You built habits, discipline. You made pain your coach. You weren't trying to win them back. You weren't trying to prove anything. You were building a version of yourself that could walk through fire and not flinch. You started taking care of your body, your mind. You stopped chasing comfort. You chose growth, even when it hurt. You understood now. Fire doesn't beg for water. Flames don't ask to be saved. They burn. And in burning, they remake everything. You became precise. Your time, your energy, your attention. It all became expensive, not out of pride, out of wisdom. You had learned the cost of being available to everyone, of saying yes too often, of explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. Now you moved with purpose. Every decision had weight. They thought you were just angry. They didn't understand that you had simply had enough. Enough of shrinking. Enough of dimming your light. Enough of pretending that their behavior was acceptable. You stopped internalizing their projections. You returned everything to sender. Their guilt, their shame, their cowardice. You stopped expecting closure. You created your own, not with words, but with distance, with silence, with results. Now, they could feel it, the shift, the absence of the version of you that once waited for them to value you. And they didn't know what to do with the new version, the one that didn't explain, didn't ask, didn't beg. They tried to provoke the old you, but that person was buried, not out of hate, out of necessity. You weren't just surviving anymore. You were growing, not in public, not in performance, in solitude, in silence. The kind of growth that can't be undone. You started to trust yourself again, your voice, your judgment. You no longer needed validation. You had clarity. You had direction. The demon in you wasn't there to destroy. It was there to protect, not to harm others. To protect the parts of you that had been too open for too long. You created space around your energy, not walls, boundaries. You no longer answered calls that felt heavy. You stopped explaining your value to people who were blind to it. You realized that peace is expensive, and that your sanity was worth more than their comfort. You weren't looking for revenge. You were building a life so solid, their opinions became background noise. You turned your pain into a plan. You executed it. They don't talk about you the same anymore. They talk with hesitation, confusion, curiosity. They don't know how to reach you now, because you're not standing where they left you. You moved, you evolved, quietly, powerfully, and you did it all without a single apology. They laughed when you were kind. They mocked the softness in your voice. They mistook your silence for weakness. You were always available, always forgiving, always trying to fix what others kept breaking. But there comes a point when the soul stops bending, when it snaps. You didn't become what they asked for. You became what they feared. You stopped answering messages that carried fake concern. You stopped making excuses for people who never showed up for you. The shift wasn't loud, but it was real. You weren't interested in proving your worth anymore. You saw the games, the manipulation, the masks, and instead of fighting them, you outgrew them. People notice change, especially when it threatens the version of you they benefited from. They used to say you were too sensitive when you cried. Now they call you cold when you no longer react. The truth is, you started choosing peace over chaos, control over confusion, and the same people who broke you began feeling uncomfortable in your presence, not because you changed, but because they couldn't control you anymore. There's something terrifying about a person who no longer needs validation, who doesn't wait for closure, who learns how to self-heal. That's what you became. You walked through fire and came out without asking anyone to feel sorry for the burns. You learned how to sit with the pain, how to process betrayal without turning bitter. And when the anger left, only clarity remained. They say healing is beautiful, but they never talk about the part where it turns you into someone unrecognizable. You stopped explaining yourself. You let people misunderstand you. You let them create their own stories. That used to bother you. Now it just amuses you, because the version of you they remember no longer exists, and they're not invited to meet the new one. Your boundaries got tighter. Your circle got smaller. The more you learned, the quieter you became. Not out of fear, not out of guilt, but because you finally understood that some people only listen to reply, not to understand. And you didn't have energy for surface conversations anymore. You had depth now. Pain had taught you how to feel things others avoid. You stopped chasing connections. You started building with intention. Loyalty became rare. Trust became sacred. You were no longer impressed by charm or talk. You watched actions, consistency, patterns. That shift scared people, because now they couldn't manipulate you with flattery. They couldn't guilt you into staying. You weren't afraid to walk away, even from those you once would have begged to stay. You weren't cruel. You were calculated. Your energy wasn't chaotic. It was disciplined. There's a difference. You still had a heart, but it had walls now, not to keep love out, but to keep poison from slipping in, dressed as love. You understood that not everyone who smiles at you is for you. Some only want access, some only want to take. And you learned how to say no without guilt. The more you changed, the more people started calling you distant or selfish. But they weren't used to you choosing yourself. They liked the version of you that said yes to everything, that sacrificed without asking, that tolerated disrespect in the name of keeping peace. But peace, built on silence, is war inside your chest, and you are tired of losing sleep for people who slept well after hurting you. You started walking into rooms differently, not with arrogance, but with certainty. Your energy became less apologetic. You didn't shrink yourself anymore to make others comfortable. You stopped smiling at people who secretly wanted to see you fail. You stopped handing out pieces of your soul like free samples. You became intentional with your presence. People began noticing. They didn't say it directly, but you felt it. The way they looked at you changed. Some admired your strength. Others resented your evolution, but none could deny it. You no longer begged to be chosen. You chose yourself, and that made all the difference. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about hurting anyone. It was about never being hurt like that again. You started protecting your peace the same way you used to protect others. You put yourself first without shame. That's not selfish. That's survival. The ones who used to drain you now say you're different, and you are, because the version of you that tolerated their disrespect had to die for you to be reborn. You stopped pretending. You stopped performing. You started living for real. And it scared people who only knew how to love the version of you that served them. They don't recognize you anymore, and that's okay. You weren't meant to stay who you were. Pain has a way of introducing you to your truest self. And the truth is, the angel in you was too forgiving, too trusting, too soft. That part of you got destroyed, and in its place, something unshakable was born. You learned to walk away without burning bridges, but you also stopped building new ones for people who never learned how to swim toward you. You stopped saving those who kept choosing to drown. You let them sink, not because you didn't care, but because you finally understood that saving them was sinking you. This isn't about hate. It's about survival, growth, power. You don't owe anyone the old version of you. Not friends, not family, not lovers. You owe yourself the peace you sacrificed, trying to be everything to everyone. And now you have it. You became the quiet storm, the calm before the reckoning. They called you emotionless, but you just stopped performing pain for an audience that clapped when you bled. Now they see you from a distance, and they feel the shift, not in words, not in actions, in energy, and it shakes them, because now you're untouchable. You didn't scream when it happened. You didn't seek revenge in public. You didn't plot chaos with a loud mouth. You didn't tell the world what you were about to do. You just moved, quietly, ruthlessly, precisely. People expected rage, but all they got was distance, the kind of silence that screams louder than anything else. They hurt you and expected a show. They thought you'd come crawling back, asking why, begging for closure. But your silence was the punishment. It wasn't a weakness. It was the final answer. You didn't argue. You didn't explain. You let them think they won, that you were broken, that you were finished. And while they laughed, you rebuilt. While they mocked you in rooms you no longer walked into, you became the person they could no longer touch. You stopped posting sad quotes. You stopped checking their updates. You stopped hoping they'd reach out. You turned the pain into power. That power wasn't loud. It didn't need validation. It didn't need witnesses. You weren't trying to prove anything anymore. You were becoming something else entirely. They underestimated you because you were once soft, because you once believed in love over logic, because you forgave things that tore you apart. And now, you didn't even look their way. You didn't have to. Your silence spoke louder than your anger ever could. You didn't need to scream that you'd changed. They saw it in your calmness, in your discipline, in the way you no longer flinched when their name was mentioned. They noticed the shift. You were no longer accessible, no longer reacting. They started asking around, started watching your every move, but you never gave them the satisfaction of a meltdown. You didn't clap back. You elevated, quietly, strategically. Your revenge wasn't an act of violence. It was a state of becoming. You glowed different. You walked into rooms with a new kind of energy, one that didn't seek approval, one that didn't chase closure. You became what they never expected, a version of yourself that didn't need them, didn't care for their apology, and didn't look back. And that scared them, not because you threatened them, but because you proved that their actions didn't define your future. You did. There's a certain weight in success they didn't expect, the kind that comes from healing without telling the world you're healing, the kind that comes from grinding in silence while everyone assumes you're still in pain, and they watch from a distance, realizing that you didn't just move on, you leveled up. You no longer cried over the things they broke. You built something new with the pieces. They wanted you to fall apart publicly. They wanted their actions to define you. They wanted to be the reason you couldn't get back up. But your silence made them uncomfortable. Your progress made them question themselves. And that's the revenge they never saw coming. Not the anger, not the confrontation, but the quiet strength, the kind that doesn't beg to be seen, but always is. They start remembering, not just what they did, but how easy it was for them to do it, how you were there, always available, always forgiving. And now, you've become someone they can't reach, someone who no longer reacts, someone who isn't waiting anymore. The guilt sets in, not because you punished them, but because you didn't. You elevated, while they stayed stuck in their habits, their cycles, their drama. You kept rising. Quiet mornings, late nights, small wins. You didn't need to announce them. You just kept going, and every step forward echoed in their minds. You didn't chase closure. You became the closure. They now have to live with what they did. You just moved forward without them. They underestimated how dangerous peace can be. Not the peace they pretended to offer, but the peace you found within. The kind that doesn't scream or threaten. It just stays unbothered, unreachable. When you stop reacting, you take back control, and they feel it. Every time they check your name, scroll through your success, hear your name brought up in admiration, they feel it. The world didn't need to know your pain. They just needed to see your progress. That was enough. You didn't paint yourself as a victim. You didn't need to. Your growth made it clear. And the beauty is, you didn't need revenge to destroy them. Your silence did. Your consistency did. Your refusal to break down did. They thought that your healing would come with loud declarations, with public speeches. But healing was quiet. It was in your habits, in your boundaries, in your refusal to lower yourself again. That silence. It was sacred. You kept your power in it. You didn't need to tell the world you were better. They saw it every time you didn't respond, and it burned them. Every moment they realized you were no longer who they hurt. Every glimpse of your strength, your growth, your stability. It was a reminder. You didn't have to destroy them. You just had to outgrow them. And you did. People think revenge is loud, explosive, dramatic. But the real kind, the most painful kind, is quiet. It's growth. It's showing up better, stronger, calmer, without them, without their input, without their apology. You stopped caring whether they understood. That was the win. You stopped hoping they'd feel remorse. That was the freedom. They still talk, still try to make sense of your silence. But your silence isn't empty. It's full of everything they'll never be a part of again. Your progress doesn't need to be posted. It's felt, it radiates, and even though you don't mention them, they still feel exposed. That's what real revenge looks like. Not vengeance, not violence, but indifference. You became the reminder, the one that haunts them in quiet moments, not because you hurt them back, but because you didn't have to. You simply became everything they were never prepared for. And that silence became the loudest thing in their life. You stood there, staring at the mirror longer than you ever had. Something was missing, and for the first time, that didn't scare you. The softness in your eyes, the light in your expression, the warmth you used to carry, all of it was gone. And you didn't reach for it. You didn't panic or cry. You noticed the absence of what used to be you, and you felt calm. The person looking back wasn't unfamiliar, just different. Not broken, not empty, just rebuilt. There was a time when you would have tried to find that old version again, the one who forgave too quickly, who explained too much, who waited around for people to choose you. But that person paid the highest price for being kind in the wrong hands. That version of you got crushed under expectations, betrayed by people you gave your soul to. That version kept giving chances to those who knew they didn't deserve them. And now, all those parts are gone. You remember being quiet and being walked over. You remember speaking up and still not being heard. You bent yourself in every direction, thinking love could fix what was broken in others. You drained your energy, trying to heal people who bled on you every time you got close. You believed in their better selves, even when they gave you every reason not to. And in the end, you were left bleeding alone. You started to rebuild when you realized no one was coming to save you. That was the hardest part, accepting that the ones you protected never planned to protect you back. They loved the angel in you because it made them feel important, adored, needed. But when the angel was tired, they vanished. The same ones who called you light were the first to run when your world turned dark. So you stopped apologizing for changing. You stopped chasing closure and started building boundaries. You stopped waiting for someone to understand the storm you went through. People only understand the pain they've felt themselves, and most never felt the weight you carried in silence. They called you cold now, distant, even arrogant. But that was only because you no longer made yourself smaller to make them comfortable. You didn't wake up one day and become someone else. This wasn't a costume. It was the product of every long night, every betrayal, every silent scream you buried in your chest. You became this through experience, through survival. People don't realize how much you have to go through to stop hoping, to stop reaching out, to stop caring in the way you once did. People think apologies come with words, but sometimes they come with silence, with the way someone looks at you but can't hold your gaze, with the way they watch your wins from a distance, hoping you don't see them watching. There's power in that, not because you wanted them to feel bad, but because now they can't undo what's been done. They can't rewrite how they treated you. And they know, no matter how much they grow or change, they'll never be invited back into the version of your life they once had access to. You were always willing to build bridges. You gave more than you got. You checked in when you were barely holding it together yourself. And they knew it. They knew your heart was too good. That's why they used it. It was never about them not seeing your value. It was about them knowing you'd stick around, even when they didn't give you anything back. But they were wrong. There was a line. And when they crossed it, you didn't argue. You just left. Now they scroll through your updates, hoping for a hint of softness, a sign that the door might still be cracked open. But you don't post for them. You don't perform. You glow differently now. Your peace isn't loud, but it's sharp. It cuts, because it shows them what they lost, what they pushed away while chasing temporary things. They miss your consistency, your loyalty, your ability to care even when you weren't okay. That kind of energy doesn't come around often, and now they sit with the weight of knowing they had it and broke it. What hurts them most isn't that you're gone. It's that you're better. You didn't just move on. You leveled up. You found joy in places they'll never touch again. Not because you blocked them, but because your energy isn't something they'll ever match. And no matter how many times they replay the past, there's no version of it where they come out looking innocent. The facts remain. They were careless with someone who would have carried the world for them. And now, they carry that guilt like a shadow. You don't need to forgive them for their peace. You forgave them for yours. You made peace with the fact that some people can love you and still break you. That some people only come close enough to study your strength, then use it against you. And that's okay, because now you know. Now you choose better. You move with purpose. You don't explain yourself. You don't shrink to make others feel comfortable. The version of you that bent over backward for people who wouldn't lift a finger is gone. This is your apology, your glow, your peace, your progress. This is what it looks like when someone stops asking to be seen and starts seeing themselves. And it stings for them, because they never thought you'd stop showing up. They thought you'd always be the one to call, to fix things, to carry the weight. But you got tired. Not all at once, but slowly, consistently, until one day you just stopped. And when you stopped, everything changed. They don't hate you. They envy the version of you that came out of the fire they helped start. They wonder how you turned pain into power, how you built strength in the same silence they mocked. But you didn't need them to understand. You just needed to keep going. And now, you're here. Solid, quiet, powerful. And they're still trying to figure out how they became the villain in a story they thought they controlled. You became the apology they never gave. Every success is a reminder. Every win echoes the space they no longer hold in your life. You didn't just heal, you elevated. And they watch from a place they can't touch, haunted by the memory of someone who loved them deeply and walked away without looking back. Not to punish, not to hurt, just because peace finally mattered more than loyalty. And that, more than anything, is what they remember now. The angel is gone, not sleeping, not waiting to return. Gone. People don't understand what it takes to kill the part of you that once loved everything with open hands. It doesn't happen in one moment. It dies slowly, with every betrayal, with every unanswered message, every forced smile when your heart was breaking. You don't just snap one day and become a demon. You bleed quietly. You suffocate in your own silence until it doesn't feel like drowning anymore. It feels like breathing. They pushed and pulled, broke you down until even your reflection stopped looking familiar. But they never expected you to stop caring. They wanted a demon to blame, so you became one, not out of rage, out of necessity, because being soft was costing your peace, because kindness was a wound that kept opening. You stopped flinching when they hurt you. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped showing up for people who didn't even notice when you were breaking. The version of you standing now doesn't need permission to exist, doesn't need validation to feel worthy. This version doesn't beg to be chosen or fight to be understood. You stopped fighting battles that were never yours to begin with. You learned the difference between giving and losing yourself. Now you protect your peace like your life depends on it, because it does. There were moments when you missed the softness, when a song or a scent triggered memories from the past. But even in those moments, you didn't wish to go back. You knew that softness came at a cost too high. It cost you your sleep, your energy, your sanity. It kept you in situations that drained you because you believed things would change. But things didn't change. People just kept taking, and you kept giving until there was nothing left of you. Now you give in silence and walk away in silence. You don't warn people when you're done. You don't argue anymore. If someone makes you question your worth, they no longer have access to it. You let people believe what they want while you focus on building what you need. It's not cruelty, it's survival. What hurt the most wasn't what they did. It was that you let it happen for so long. You kept shrinking your spirit to make space for their comfort. You let people stay who showed you every day that they didn't value you. And when you finally pulled away, they called you changed. They didn't realize they created the change. They molded the very silence that now scares them. Now there's a quiet power in the way you move, in your stillness, in your refusal to explain yourself. You've become the person who walks away without warning, who doesn't wait to be pushed one more time. You've learned that silence is often louder than any confrontation, that disappearing is more powerful than being right. Some say you're bitter. Some say you've become too guarded. But they don't know the nights you spent trying to fix what was breaking you. They don't know the conversations you had with yourself when everyone else disappeared. They don't know how hard it is to be kind in a world that rewards manipulation. You didn't change for revenge. You changed for survival. And the old you, the angel, you buried them with love, not shame. That version of you wasn't weak. It was just too trusting, too hopeful. But it taught you everything you needed. It gave you a blueprint of what not to do, of who not to become again. So you let it go. You said goodbye without regret. Now, when people try to return, they find doors closed, not locked out of anger, closed for peace. You no longer give second chances to the same disrespect. You don't entertain people who only show up when it's convenient. The price of entry into your life is consistency, honesty, effort, and most don't have the currency to meet it anymore. The mirror reflects someone who no longer fears losing people, who no longer craves love that comes with conditions. You became your own protector, your own sanctuary. The world may not notice the shift, but you do, and it's enough. The angel is gone, not by accident, not by force, by choice. They remember now, not because you reminded them, but because the silence you built is louder than anything they expected. You don't need to scream or send long messages trying to explain your pain. They remember every ignored call, every time you cried in silence and no one noticed. Not because they forgot, but because it was easier to pretend you didn't matter. Now they look back and it hits them like a weight they can't shake. They remember the softness you carried, the way you held space for everyone, even when no one held it for you. That kind of love doesn't vanish. It haunts. You didn't become great to prove them wrong. That was never the goal. You evolved because staying the same would have killed you. What they see now isn't revenge. It's survival. The version of you that let things slide, forgave too soon, gave second chances without hesitation. That person no longer exists, and they feel it. They don't say it out loud, but their eyes change when they see you. Their tone shifts. There's an edge of guilt they try to hide behind casual conversations or half-hearted check-ins. It's not concern. It's guilt in disguise. Guilt always comes dressed as curiosity. How have you been? Is never really about you. It's their conscience reaching for relief. They called you cold, said you'd changed, but no one asked why. They never ask why. They just point at the outcome and ignore the pain that caused it. But you know, you remember every second, every scar. There was a time when you would have done anything to be understood. That time passed. You no longer wish to be seen. You don't need to be. You built yourself in the shadows. You became your own shelter, your own protection, your own peace. Forgiveness stopped being your habit. You no longer hand it out like candy, not because you're bitter, but because some things should never be forgiven. Some people don't deserve access to the version of you that was willing to drown for them. You learned that loyalty, when misplaced, is self-destruction, and no one claps for you when you choose yourself. But you do it anyway, quietly, relentlessly. They tried to break your softness, and they did. Not because you were weak, but because you were open, because you were honest. You were everything this world chews up. But the beautiful thing, you came back, just not as the same person. You didn't rebuild the angel, you built armor. You crafted walls that don't fall with sweet words or half apologies. You stopped making excuses for bad behavior. You stopped tolerating what you don't deserve. Your love now has requirements. Your energy is not available on discount. People used to think they could come and go from your life. Not anymore. Access has a price, and most can't afford it. That's not pride. That's protection. Because pain teaches you boundaries. It teaches you the difference between selflessness and self-destruction. Now you walk differently, not louder, just with more clarity. You know who you are, and more importantly, who you are not. You are no longer the person who needed to be everything for everyone. You stopped begging people to stay. You stopped explaining your worth. If someone doesn't see it, that's not your problem anymore. You are no longer for convincing. You are for choosing. People say healing is about finding the old you. But what if the old you was the reason you got hurt in the first place? What if the angel in you needed to die so something stronger could live? You don't look for who you used to be. You buried them, and not with sadness, but with relief. That version of you couldn't survive in the world you're in now. That version was too gentle for wolves, too trusting for liars, too open for the emotionally unavailable. Now you're not angry, not hurt, just done. Done repeating cycles. Done carrying people who won't even meet you halfway. Done waiting for closure. Some things will never be explained, and that's fine. You've learned to create peace where there is no apology. You've mastered the art of moving forward without looking back. That's what true growth is. It's not about softening again. It's about hardening where you once broke. They don't know how strong you had to become just to stop crying, just to get out of bed, just to smile in public when your chest felt hollow. And they never will. That strength is yours. That silence you carry. It's full of stories no one will ever read. And that's okay. You're not a story for everyone. You're not for public understanding. You're for private peace. You no longer need revenge. Your existence is enough. The fact that you kept going, that you're still breathing, still building, still becoming, that is the punishment for those who tried to destroy you. They will remember what they did, even if they never say it. You don't need their guilt. You don't care for their regret. Your silence is louder than anything you could ever say. There's no going back. That door is locked, not because of hate, but because it cost too much to leave it open. You're not the person who sees the good in everyone anymore. You see the truth. You see patterns. You notice tone, energy, absence. You pay attention now, not with hope, but with caution. And that's not being negative. That's being wise. Some people will hate this new version of you. They'll say you're distant, hard, emotionless. But that's only because they knew the angel. They knew the version that broke herself to make them whole. This version doesn't do that. This version stays whole, even if it means standing alone, even if it means being misunderstood. There is no softness waiting to be rediscovered. That innocence is gone, not lost, killed. And you're not reviving what was murdered, because you know better now. You know that not everyone deserves your warmth. Not everyone deserves your forgiveness. Not everyone deserves access to your soul. And that's not bitterness. That's wisdom born from pain. The world didn't make room for your kindness, so you stopped offering it. Not to everyone, only to those who've earned it. That's the difference now. You still love, you still care, but with limits, with boundaries, with standards. And if that makes you the villain in their story, so be it. At least now, you're the hero in your own.